In this video, I'm going to be doing a breakdown of all the obstacles and technical challenges I had to overcome to make Enderman Attack possible, so be sure to watch until the end and I'm sure you'll learn something cool that you didn't know before. The story. Most of my story ideas come to me as I'm laying down in bed before sleeping, so I keep my phone nearby just to jot down ideas as they come to my head. Originally, the story was supposed to end at the Ender base and they just go right back home, but then I discovered a show called Demon Slayer and decided to release my inner fanboy and write a scene where I could have some crazy combat. Thus, The Gap, which was my take on the fictional Enderman teleport dimension, was born. It was an excuse for me to have a zero-gravity dimension that doesn't really make literal sense, but sets the stage for a pretty epic fight scene. Regarding the overall story, I wanted there to be a super fast progression, so I wrote in a major fight about every 2 minutes with relevant content in between to hold everyone's interest as best as I could. Keep your YouTube stories short and snappy, folks. It seems that people's attention spans these days are shorter than the life of a Minecraft fox. Scene 1. This scene didn't really have very many technical challenges per se, and all I really did for the particles was to model a thingy that looked like an Enderman particle, give it some emission, some random rotation and scale, and boom, there you have it. All I did with Alex's corruption effect is switch between different skins progressively over time when she was being corrupted, which was the same thing I did with her eyes too, and that was that. The rest of the scene was just trying to be clever about my directing and camera movement, so nothing really all too special. Scene 2. This one again didn't really have many technical challenges, though I did have to reuse a lot of space since when I built this set, I didn't realize that one little tiny forest clearing wouldn't be enough space to make an entire fight happen. You can see if I go outside of the camera view that on some camera cuts I have characters teleport around to get the most out of the limited space that I have. This is a pretty common trick used to get the illusion of characters traveling across more ground. It works well as long as you don't make it very obvious. I was going for a more anime-style time dilation with some of these shots because I really wanted to emphasize key moments. I think I might have overdone it a bit honestly, but I still think it did turn out pretty darn cool, and I'm happy with the final result. Scene 3. Boom, cut, and we're already there in the Enderman base. Alex and Steve are already there. This is what I meant earlier about no wasted time and keeping story beats really fast. I spent forever on this first shot revealing the base, and I took a lot of inspiration from the Final Fantasy XIV dungeon reveal shots, which I always thought were pretty awesome. Other than that, all I really did was just some cool transitions, timing animation with the music, and fading between the skies and skins just like I showed in Scene 1. There isn't much else to go over. As for lighting, I just used some point lights to warm up the area around the lava and tweak the material colors a bit to make them a little bit more vibrant and visually pleasing. Scene 4. Where to begin? Oh boy. Alright, let's begin with the skybox. To understand this, we need to understand the basics of how procedural texture layering works. And what that means in English is telling the computer where to put the cracks, since making the cracks themselves is actually the easy part. How we do this in 3D is with whites and blacks. Think of whites as 1 and blacks as 0, just like binary, with trues and falses. Anywhere that's white will have display the cracks, and anywhere that's black will hide the cracks. To make this randomized, we'll use what's called a noise texture, which is just a built-in texture that Blender already has, and it has a nice amount of randomness to it and is super useful for breaking things up. We're going to convert this colorful mess of a texture to whites and blacks using what's called a color ramp, which takes the texture and converts it to a grayscale. Now we're getting closer to what we need. We then find an effect that looks like cracks, and there's another noise texture that's called Voronoi that looks like it's a bunch of cells that we can use the outlines for since they have that kind of cracky, fracture-y look to them. We can then use the color ramp to get our grayscale texture, give the cracks some color using that same color ramp, and then layer that on top of our white and black map where it only shows the cracks on the whites and they're hidden on the blacks. In order to do this, we use what's called a multiply node. Remember when I said that whites were like a 1 and blacks were like a 0? We're using the white and black map for math. Anything times 1 is just itself, and anything times 0 is 0. That's why the blacks cause the cracks to disappear, because we're multiplying them on those black areas by a value of 0. Never did I think I'd be using math in 3D, but it actually comes up all the time. This same texturing principles are applied to the sword trails. Everything is procedural and done using the same method as the sky, just with playing around with the scale and coloration of the textures. I did have to rig the textured plane to stretch using animated bones so I could control the positioning of the slash, But honestly, I don't even remember half the steps to do this because I just followed a tutorial for this one, and I've got next to no experience with rigging. I just got it working and tried to make it fancy where it would simulate the slash for me, but it kind of bugged out since Steve was literally moving at almost the speed of sound, so I just opted to animate every single frame by hand. The portals were also very similar with texturing, though the special thing about the portals is that I use what's called a layer weight, which what that does is it makes the center of the material transparent and see-through, and as we get closer to the outside of it, it gradually becomes less transparent and a lot more solid. No matter how you rotate the camera, it will always look this way on any shape. All I did for the places inside the portals was take renders from my other scenes, import them as images, slap them inside the portal, use what's called a Boolean modifier to cut them into the right shape, gave them some omission, and called it a day. For all the fancy particle trails, I just animated the camera doing some random motion that I thought looked cool and not too disorienting, and then I made lines that I tweaked to always be in the camera's view, and then animated spheres on top of those lines at different speeds to give it some interesting and lively feeling motion, and then I made those spheres that I animated into particle emitters, and I made them glow. So they had like that little ball effect that you see in the beginning of scene 4, and they also have particles following them. It sounds pretty complicated, but it's really just the combination of a lot of very simple steps. As for how I tackled the super fast slashing scene, what I did was I just had a separate camera animated to a track, which is just the same line technique that I used with the particle trails, with the center of the camera snapped onto what we call an empty or null object, and I just parented that empty object to Steve to always have him in the frame where I wanted him. The software did the rest for me. Blender is pretty awesome. For the red and black scene, I just turned the sky to red and I cast negative light on the characters. And yeah, you can literally have lights set to negative brightness that emit darkness in Blender, which is honestly pretty cool. And since this was a beefy scene, I'm taking the liberty of a short intermission. If I missed anything about this scene that you want to know, feel free to join our Discord and give me a holler in our help and support channel, and I'll do my best to answer your questions. In our rules, you're not supposed to ping directors, but I'll make an exception just this once for pinging me only for stuff related to Enderman Attack. Alright, with that out of the way, let's finish this. Scene 5. I keep saying this, but there really wasn't too much special about this scene either, except for the rays coming out of the chest at the end. All I did was I made an emissive cube, I made it visible when the chest cracked open, and then I used a sunbeams node and a color correction node to isolate the brightest parts of the scene in the compositing tab, which in English means I just told the computer to apply the sunbeams effect to the brightest parts of the scene, which would be that glowy cube inside the chest. And boom, that's all there was to it. And I think that covers just about everything. Each animation project takes several hundred hours, if not over 1,000 hours to complete, depending on the length and intensity, and a whole lot more work than you guys would think goes into a little 8 to 10 minute animated short. Thanks for watching, I'll catch you guys in the next one.
Oh, there he goes! Drop and give me 10, Steve!
Drop it, give me 10, soldier!
He's going so fast!
3, 2, 1.
Go, go, go.
Come on, Alex. Come on. Ooh, that was close.
Okay, he's over there, he's over there!
What is it there?